Welcome to Odd's Bodkins Curiosity Shop, where you'll find the unique, the bizarre, and sometimes the haunted. Feel free to look around, peruse the items, and never fear, there's nothing here that bites. Hard anyway. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Odd's Bodkins Curiosity Shop, your home for all things horror, fantasy, and science fiction. I'm your shopkeeper, Chris Baker, and today I decided to pull a selection off the bookcase of haunted tales, lost manuscripts, and forgotten tomes. It is the 1971 horror classic, the novel The Exorcist, by author William Peter Blatty, adapted into one of the greatest horror films of all time. But as we all have heard the tales of the cursed nature of the set of that film, it raises a question that, while it may not be answered in a more recent film, it does tackle very familiar subject matter. So without further ado, let's pull out the kinetoscope and take a look at the new film, The Exorcism. So The Exorcism just released this past weekend, and a film it's a little dubious. I've, in some regards, looking forward to this film. In other regards, I had very low expectations for this film, because this is yet again another Russell Crowe exorcism movie, and we just got one. Was it last year? Yeah, it was last year. Russell Crowe was in The Pope's Exorcist. Not a great movie. I didn't love the movie, but it had some good things about it. It had some good acting. I really liked Russell Crowe in that very Italian accent, playing a true figure in history, in the history of exorcism. I liked that. The first part of the movie was very much like your stereotypical exorcism movie. And then it changed tone from like this exorcism movie to like almost an Indiana Jones style archaeological action adventure towards the end of it. Fucking weird, but for some reason it worked with me on an entertainment level that I enjoyed the movie well enough. It wasn't a great movie, but I enjoyed the movie well enough. But then you see this trailer and it's like, oh, Russell Crowe playing another priest in another exorcism movie. Now, this isn't exactly that. He's an actor playing a priest on the set of a movie in this movie. There are a lot of meta elements about this, especially when you find out that the director of this movie is Joshua John Miller. He is the son of the actor Jason Miller, who played Father Karras in the original Exorcist. So there are some meta elements about that as well. And to me, it felt very interesting. But I know a lot of people have been talking about this movie. And if you haven't watched it yet, I'm not going to spoil anything just yet. We are going to get into some spoiler territory. But you have to go into this movie realizing what the exorcism really is. And I think if you go into it realizing that the exorcism in this movie, the titular exorcism, isn't so much of a spiritual kind as it is more of a personal kind, I think you're going to understand the ending of this a little better. Doesn't mean it was a great movie. I don't know. Is it a good movie? I'm not even sure about that. I enjoyed it well enough. I enjoyed the beginning of it. The second act felt a little cliched and kind of got a little, I don't want to say dull, but it dried up a little bit. And then the ending was action-packed and exciting, but totally didn't match. I don't know. There's a lot for me to still process, and hopefully I'll do that as I'm talking about this. But without further ado, I am going to get into spoiler territory. So if you haven't watched The Exorcism, go check it out. It's an interesting enough movie. I think it's definitely worth a watch. The beginning of it, the setup of it, it is kind of Joshua John Miller trying to subvert the expectations of Exorcist movie tropes. in the first part of the movie. Then he kind of leans into those a little bit. I don't know whether that's ironically or just because you're making an exorcism movie, you gotta have some of those tropes in it. But the ending is interesting. I found the interesting part of this movie, the ending, although some people did not like it at all. So go check it out if you haven't watched it. If you have watched it, you don't care about spoilers one way or the other, keep listening because we are going to head directly into some spoiler territory. So as I said, this movie is about an actor played by Russell Crowe who is kind of down on his luck as far as acting goes, trying to make a comeback. He's dealt with some alcoholism and addiction issues. His wife died of cancer. I believe it was cancer. His daughter and him are estranged because of the alcoholism and the fact that he wasn't there for his wife and her mother when, she needed him most. So the guy's got some issues, and he's got this movie part to play a priest in an exorcism movie. And I found it kind of funny that the father, which we'll get into the names here in a little bit, but the father and daughter sitting there, going over lines, and she reads the title on the front page of the script that says the Georgetown Project. And a lot of movies, so things don't get leaked out, so movie titles don't get leaked out, like Blue Harvest. That was what they called Star Wars when they were making it, because they didn't want things getting leaked out. Maybe there's a different reason for that, but that's generally what happens. And this movie that he is auditioning for is the Georgetown Project. And of course, Georgetown is where the events of the movie The Exorcist took place. And she says, "Oh, you're not remaking that movie, are you?" And he's like, "Yes, they're remaking that movie." And so it's kind of a little meta nod that the movie that Russell Crowe is playing the priest in is a remake of The Exorcist, even though they don't say it by name. And of course, when you factor that in with the ties that Joshua John Miller, the director, is the son of Jason Miller, Father Karras from The Exorcist, it really was an interesting route to go. I know a lot of people are really confused whether this is supposed to be about the making of The Exorcist or what. It's loosely based on that premise that there is a remake of The Exorcist going on. They pay homage to some of the notions that The Exorcist was a cursed set, and then that this remake of The Exorcist, alleged remake of The Exorcist, is a cursed set. So a lot of kind of winks to the camera in that regard with this. And they also did that with the name of a lot of these characters. Of course, Russell Crowe's character is Anthony Miller, and Jason Miller, his actual birth name is John Anthony Miller Jr. So Anthony Miller in this movie is a nod to Jason Miller from the Exorcist movie. His daughter, Lee Miller, played by Ryan Simpkins, I don't know where the Lee comes from, if that is any nod, but you have to imagine this relationship between Anthony Miller and Lee Miller, the Russell Crowe and Ryan Simpkins characters, has to be kind of a nod to the relationship between Jason Miller and Joshua John Miller. Because from what I understand, they didn't have the best relationship. Jason Miller wasn't the best father. And as a director and a screenwriter, of course, Joshua John Miller co-wrote this with his partner, Mark Fortin. And I have to imagine part of that relationship between Anthony and Lee has to mirror, in some aspects, the relationship between Jason Miller and Joshua John Miller. But I enjoyed the performances from Russell Crowe and Ryan Simpkins. Russell Crowe does a really good job of playing a good actor who's not doing good acting. And then when he nails scenes, he's having trouble with every scene. And the director in this movie, which we'll get into that character and that actor here in a minute, he's just not given the performance the director wants. And you have that moment in the climax where he finally gets it. And when it turns to a real life exorcism, and what he's gone through at this moment, we'll talk a little more about the climax coming up, but that moment where it all becomes real to him and he's no longer acting. He is just being himself, and the feeling and the faith that has been restored in him because of what he's gone through. That was a powerful moment for me. I really enjoyed his performance in that. Ryan Simpkins, you may not be as familiar with her. I know I'm not terribly familiar with some of the things she's been in, although she was in the Fear Street movies that came out on Netflix. The one in particular I remember her from was my favorite of the three movies, was the Fear Street Part 2, 1978. I thought she did a really good job. She played Alice in those movies and did a really good job in that movie, and really loved her in this. I thought she did a fantastic job with the aspect of this character that is, like I said, estranged from her father. She loves her father, but she can't seem to forgive him for what he did to their family and how he wasn't there for her and her mother. And she really plays that kind of fine line between caring because he's her dad and being upset with him because of the choices, the self-destructive choices he made, and where he's going in this, where she feels he's kind of slipping back and not taking care of himself as things start to progress with his downward spiral. And she did a really good job with playing a lot of that emotion and a lot of those character beats. There was another really meta moment towards the beginning of the movie once they get on set and you hear the director, Peter. Again, we'll get into that character and the actor who plays him coming up here shortly. But there's a moment where he's describing to people how the movie that they're making within this movie is a horror movie, but it's not so much a horror movie as it is a psychological drama wrapped inside the supernatural elements of a horror movie. And to me, that was a very meta moment because he was explaining to you, the audience, what this movie is. This is a psychological drama. This is a drama between a father who's done horrible things and feels that he's unforgivable, and a daughter who loves him but can't forgive him. And it is about that father-daughter relationship and the drama of that. And it is all draped in the cloak of a supernatural, demonic possession, exorcism style movie. And I loved, again, another little wink to the camera and a wink to the audience. Hey, this is what this movie that you're watching is really all about. So I love the performance of Russell Crowe and Ryan Simpkins in the context of this relationship between this father and daughter. But there are a lot of other really good actors. Sam Worthington, who I love as an actor. I'd like to see him in more things. He played Joe. Small part, but he just, he rocked at the scenes he was in. Had one of the best deaths in this movie. I enjoyed him in that. Chloe Bailey played Blake Holloway, a love interest with the Lee character. I thought she did a good job. David Hyde Pierce as Father Connor was outstanding. Was not a big fan of the Frasier show, but as an actor, you can't deny some of the things he's done and the career he's had, and to see him playing this and during that climax, and again, I'll talk about that, but he had a powerful moment. You realize what a good actor he is. He made you totally forget that he was Niles Crane in the Frasier TV series, and just really made you feel that he was this Father Connor character. And then one of the characters I quite enjoyed, smaller parts, didn't have a ton in this, but Adam Goldberg as Peter, the director of this Exorcism remake that they're doing, he did a really good job. And he always does a good job with characters, but I really liked this character and how Miller and Fortin wrote this character, because for me, I saw a lot of Joshua John Miller physically in the Adam Goldberg. He kind of had the short, dark haircut, the black rimmed glasses, the beard. He kind of looked like Joshua John Miller in some regards, in little bits, but he had the personality, or maybe not the personality, but kind of how everybody thought of William Friedkin when he directed The Exorcist, because he did a lot of unscrupulous things, according to a lot of people, to get the performances out of the actors that he wanted. Said a lot of horrible things to get the performance out of the actor that he wanted. And Adam Goldberg had a lot of scenes where he's bringing up a lot of personal things to Russell Crowe's Anthony Miller. to pull a performance out of him, and just delving into Anthony's past and a lot of these deep, dark, personal things that would just it made you feel so empathetic towards Anthony and how broken he is already, and he's trying to put himself back together, and it's just these words break him apart again. And it is those are some really powerful scenes as well, and Adam Goldberg did a really good job as the director, Peter. But one of my favorite parts of this first part of the movie, it is a lot of the setup of the relationship between Tony and Lee, Anthony and Lee, and their relationship, and the tension of when things start to go wrong. And they did a really good job from a directing standpoint. Joshua John Miller, he did a really excellent job of building some very tense scenes. There were some really creepy scenes where Lee is kind of walking around the apartment and it's dark, and she walks past something and sees her dad, then walks back and he's not there. The stairwell scene where Anthony is down there naked and peeing and speaking in Latin, and that was a creepy, tense scene. They had a lot of really good tension-filled scenes and suspenseful scenes in the beginning of this movie. Even the quiet intro to this, where you get the title cards and everything, and it's so quiet, it just built a lot of suspense. And I think once things start to go downhill for Anthony in the second act, that's where it does kind of lean into some exorcism tropes that part of me wishes they would have stayed away from the tropes and tried to do some new things. But then again, if it's done in an ironic way, if you're doing this because those are tropes that were created essentially by The Exorcist, then I can understand that. We've seen it before, but why wouldn't we see it in a movie that is about a remake of, allegedly, The Exorcist? So that didn't bother me as much. But the pacing in that second act was a little... things didn't move as much as there were some scenes that just drug out way too long. Scenes leading up to the third act finale kind of drug out a little bit long. And probably my least favorite portion of this movie was kind of that second act and the middle, because the intro was really good. I really enjoyed, warts and all, the climax of this movie. But yeah, that second act kind of drug out a little bit. Another thing I really dug about this movie was the set. It's kind of weird, and like I said, very meta when you're talking about sets within a set. But the set for this movie is a movie set, and they do it in this almost dollhouse-like manner, which was really creepy, and it added an unreal effect to things, an effect that just felt unnerving. Like you're watching things happen, but is it real, or is it, like I said, it looks like a dollhouse, and it felt very inhuman, which leans into the inhuman nature of demon possession and things like that. But I thought the set was really cool from a set design standpoint. That was really interesting. And then you had that cold room set where they actually did that on The Exorcist to create the frosty breath effects, as that they put this set the stage in a room and just had air conditioners going and made it super cold. Another torturous. Of course, today they'd all add that in CG and it'd look horrible. So, one man's torturous set is another man's practical effect. Who knows? But I thought that set, from a look standpoint, the sets looked really good and added kind of a detached feeling about this. So this whole movie, and I say that in the best way possible, because you become attached to these characters. You like the Anthony and the Lee characters. You like a lot of the other characters. You become attached to them, but then you have these scenes of these sound stages, and then all of a sudden you kind of feel like you're pulled away from them, and it makes you feel very surreal. It makes things feel very otherworldly, for lack of a better term. And I thought, like I said, those sets really set a tone that made this feeling of unease about the whole thing. Every time you you were on this movie set. Now, I know one of the things a lot of people were unhappy about was the end of this movie. And you have Russell Crowe that's slowly becoming possessed. And this character is a complicated character because he has a history with the Catholic Church, where he was, I think they're alluding to the fact that he was raped by a priest. It's why he hasn't been a practicing Catholic in probably decades. He's lost his faith. There was kind of a nod to the fact that this demon that's possessing him, Moloch, there were some paintings of Moloch in the room where the priest violated him. I don't know whether that was part of a dream-like vision that connects him to the Moloch demon that eventually ends up possessing him, but you have him essentially being broken down over and over again to where he's made vulnerable to this demon. He's made to feel like the sins of his past are unforgivable, and that leaves him in a vulnerable state and susceptible to the infestation of the Moloch demon within him. And there's a slow decline in what feels like his sanity. At first, it feels like he's not taking his meds, and then he becomes fully possessed. And you have that scene where it all ends up in that cold room, and you have Father Connor and Lee and Blake, and they're facing off against Anthony, who is possessed by this demon. And I really liked that. It was a little bit of a twist where Father Connor says, when it happens, run to the two girls, and he goes and invites the demon into him. Which, I mean, it's a little bit of plot armor for Russell Crowe's character. And now that he's our main, not our hero, not our protagonist, but he is a guy you care about. You don't want to see anything happen to him. And it makes him unpossessed again, and he can still fight the demon. Maybe, from a plot standpoint, that's a little bit convenient. But I liked it. I don't mind that, because I do like Russell Crowe. I do like him as this Anthony Miller character. It allows him for a redemption that you want so badly for him to have, and then he faces off against this demon in Father Connor, and the whole stabbing him with the silver crucifix and him catching on fire was horrific. And then that moment where he's talking to his daughter that he loves her, always remember that he loves her, and you realize that he's going to go to jail for murdering a guy, and that's how it ends. You have that moment where he's giving confession in jail, and you see glimpses of Lee in the not too distant future. Her dye's all grown out, her hair's longer, she's writing a script and sending bits to her father. And that monologue by Russell Crowe as Anthony Miller at the end of it, where he's talking about forgiveness and not knowing what forgiveness really means, because he can forgive himself, other people can forgive him, God can forgive him for the things that he's done, but that doesn't take away the things he did when he was an addict and an alcoholic. There's still the destruction left. His wife is still dead, and his daughter missed years with him because of his choices. And there was a really interesting, commentary on forgiveness of self and dealing with everything left in the wake of self-destruction. And I love that line at the very end when Anthony Miller is talking about forgiveness and talking about how, he can forgive himself, God can forgive him, other people can forgive him, but he still bears the weight of the things he did with his self-destructive nature, and how he's always felt unforgivable. He doesn't feel like he deserves the forgiveness that people say that he's given, but he talks about getting a second chance with his daughter, and that second chance feels like grace. And to me, that was such a powerful line and delivered so well by Russell Crowe. And it really speaks to kind of this whole idea of this, that, no matter what we do, we may feel like we cannot be forgiven for the things that we've done, but when we are given that second chance, whether it's by God, whether it's by our family members, whether it's by society at large, it does feel like an ounce of grace, and it does feel like that burden is lifted off our shoulders, if even momentarily. And I really loved the whole concept of that. And that's kind of where you have to look at this movie. A lot of people were upset because this is called The Exorcism. And part and parcel, it's one letter off from The Exorcist. And this movie is kind of a fictionalized recount of some of the, not even a recount of some of the things that went on during the set of The Exorcist, but it's playing off the cursed set notion from The Exorcist with an Exorcist remake. There is kind of that connection there, the exorcism, The Exorcist. And a lot of people were upset that the exorcism that we got in this was lackluster. I didn't think it was lackluster. It was a little bit different. It wasn't your typical exorcism that we usually get. The whole idea of the priest inviting the demon into him to save the protagonist, that to me felt a little different. You don't see a ton of that. Every once in a while you do. But for me, the exorcism of this movie, the titular exorcism of this movie, wasn't getting the demon out of Anthony. It wasn't battling the demon that was in Father Connor. The real exorcism of this movie was Anthony Miller exorcising his own personal demons. The exorcism of this movie, called The Exorcism, wasn't an exorcism on a spiritual level. It was an exorcism on a personal level. And given the relationship that Joshua John Miller had with his father, Jason Miller, and kind of equating that to Anthony Miller in this movie and Lee Miller in this movie, and that relationship that was strained because of self-destructive choices. I don't know what Jason Miller and Joshua John Miller relationship ended up being like before he passed away in 2001. But I almost wonder if this is the redemption that he hoped his father felt before he passed away. There's definitely, I think, a personal commentary to the end of this film that is very personal to Joshua Miller in regards to his dad, Jason Miller. And when you look at it that way, I don't care that the exorcism was this, that, or the other thing. I don't care if it played out beyond your expectations or subverted your expectations or was less than what you expected. That's not the exorcism of this movie, The Exorcism. The exorcism was Anthony Miller finally ridding himself of maybe not the guilt. Maybe he got the forgiveness he needed, but he understands that, no matter how much he gains forgiveness from others and even forgives himself, or that God forgives him, there's still destruction in the wake of his self-destructive behavior, and he's come to terms with that. And that is an exorcism of personal demons. That I think that is the real exorcism of this movie. And to me, that makes this movie a very interesting movie. It makes the ending very interesting. And, for all intents and purposes, I enjoyed this movie well enough. It was a good enough movie. I didn't love it. I didn't think it broke the mold of what an exorcism movie should be or could be. It played into some tropes, but it also did some different things. It started out strong, maybe kind of dipped in the middle. But I think for me, it ended, maybe it's not as strong as it started, but it did rebound enough that I enjoyed it well enough. I enjoyed Russell Crowe's performance. Like I said, in that final scene where not the final scene, but in that exorcism scene where he's had so much trouble saying the lines of this priest in this movie because he didn't believe it. He had lost his faith, but he had been possessed by a demon, and he understands the powers and principalities that are at stake, and he says those lines, maybe not word for word, but the heart of them. He said what they meant with conviction. He had conviction now. And I think that is part of the whole exorcism of his own personal demons subplot. And that to me was a powerful performance from him. I really enjoyed that. Like I said, the Lee Miller character played by Ryan Simpkins, she did a fantastic job. Really can't wait to see more from her. And this movie ended well enough that I'm looking forward to seeing more from Joshua John Miller and see more movies written by him and his partner, Mark Fortin. I really enjoyed this movie from a writing standpoint because I thought it had some really interesting things, some really good dialogue, some moments that I enjoyed that way, some nods to the camera, some meta moments, just given the personal connection Joshua John Miller has with The Exorcist. I really enjoyed those from a writing standpoint. And the cinematography, I think a lot of these shots were really interesting. It felt suffocating and claustrophobic in some of these movie set scenes. And there were shots where like everything was always moving. Some shots that just the camera's just always moving ever so slightly and just gave a really interesting feel to this movie from a visual standpoint, from the direction and the cinematography that I quite enjoyed. So I want to thank everyone for listening to my thoughts on The Exorcism. You can check it out now, a movie that I enjoyed. Not a great movie. It could be an argument made that it's not even a good movie, but it was good enough that I had a good time watching it. And when it's all said and done, it had a message and a theme that I think all of us on some level can relate to. That exorcism of personal demons, the true exorcism of the exorcism that I think we can all grasp a hold of and chew on, sink our teeth into if we let ourselves. So I want to thank everyone for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this movie as much as I did. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Definitely worth a watch. It's not a bad movie, no matter what anybody says. I enjoyed it, and hopefully you will as well. So thanks for listening. You can check out more about what's going on with Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shop on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Find out what's going on with the latest episodes. We're always posting about horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Like, follow, subscribe to us wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. Stay on top of all the latest episodes. Please leave a review. 5 stars would be awesome. And share this podcast with anyone that you know that loves horror, fantasy, and science fiction. So until next time. Thank you for visiting Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shop. We hope that you found something to your liking and visit the shop again soon. But even though you may come back, you never really get to leave Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shop.